Hello, and welcome to the Bad Humanist Thoughts on Personal Loot. So, in this little video here, I'm going to be talking about my thoughts on the proposed change to all loot being personal loot in Battle for Azeroth. Now, I want to make very clear that this is not official. We don't know if it's happen for sure. They've talked about it. Ian has definitely hinted at making this change, talking about how Master Loot doesn't seem to be important or valuable anymore without tier. And I just wanted to give you my perspectives on this change. Now, I will say that my perspective is going to be that of a top 10% ranked Mythic Raider. So again, I'm by no means top tier. I'm by no means top 100, 1,000, anything like that. At the highest that my guild got in this last tier, we were up there around like top 6% or so. So again, competitive, definitely trying to push, definitely trying to succeed in the tier, obviously. But again, by no means are we cutting edge in that kind of sense. It should be noted as well that I was loot master for this guild. So again, I have a lot of experience with being loot master. We ran a loot council system. I was kind of like the final decider on those decisions as well. We had a good council of officers, and again, I was kind of like the leaning decision choice there. So, as a loot master, this is a change that I am understanding of, but I hope they make some changes to personal loot. Now, in general, one thing you'll find out about me is that I tend to not get overworked about any of these changes. I've already talked previously about the GCD change. I thought that was people were over exaggerating the crappiness of that, and we've already seen that Blizzard's kind of pulled back a little bit on that GCD change, allowing for racials and trinkets to be off, which I think is great, especially the trinket part being off. I think is great. That could definitely get very clunky if you had two unused trinkets. So, as I said, I don't think that overreacting is ever a good idea. I think that you're better off to kind of approach it from a calm, logical perspective. My background is in philosophy, so again, I tend to have a very rational approach towards these kind of things. And so here are my thoughts on personal loot. So first off, let's talk about the kind of pros and cons that I see of the old master loot system, the current personal loot system, and then I'll talk about how I think that they might be able to modify the personal loot system in Battle for Azeroth to maybe make it a good mixture of both worlds. So first things first. Currently on live in Legion, top end guilds have the choice of what kind of loot system they want. Now, most of them will go with a loot council. Some, of course, still have DKP. I'm sure there's other loot methods out there as well, but most of them go with a loot council. The idea being that you want to get the loot to the people who can help you the most, and that's really what I'm a huge fan of in the current loot council. Is this idea of it's not about the individual, it's about the raid. If a piece of loot drops, you want it to go to the person to be the biggest upgrade for it. If somebody already has 950, someone else has a 935, and a 955 drops, why give it to the person that has a 950? It is an upgrade for them, sure, but again, it's a bigger upgrade for that lower person. Now, the issue comes down to this idea of like entitlement, this idea of who deserves to get loot, who's qualified to get loot, and that's a philosophical thing that I think each guild can decide upon. I know some guilds who say, trials can't get loot for X period of time, and there's good reason for that, right? There's good reason because there's been plenty of people who've been burned by trials coming in, getting loot, and then leaving. And you want to kind of reward those people who've been around and kind of dedicated their time and effort to the guild. And so I completely understand that perspective. Some people feel that that's unfair to trials, right? That they come in and they help you kill the boss, right? There are cases where trials are maybe some of your better players even, and they aren't eligible for loot. Now, it should be noted that there's still bonus rolls, so they still can get loot. But again, they're not offered the loot that drops. And no one wants to see loot drops like, oh my gosh, I really wanted that piece and then not get it. I think that's the biggest issue that people face in the mass looting system is the idea of, oh my gosh, I could get that piece. And I think it's one of those things where we kind of envision ourselves with it. It's that kind of idea of the difference between gambling for $20 and then being given $20 and gambling it, right? When you've been given those $20 and you're gambling with it, you feel worse when you lose as opposed to if you're just gambling to win $20 and end up losing because you never had the $20 in the first place. Here, I think when the loot drops and you see that loot panel go up, in your mind, a lot of people are saying, that's my piece. I'm going to have that piece. It's going to be awesome. I'm going to do more DPS. It's going to finish the set, right? Getting loot feels great, right? That's one of the things I think we play this game for, is that rush of getting new loot, getting better, improving ourselves. And yeah, I think that's a big thing that drives the kind of like pursuit of killing bosses and progressing in mythic tiers. So I don't want to lose that, right? But again, I do think that sometimes the master loot system had its flaws because there's, of course, loot drama. We've had multiple issues, again, as a loot master, I can guarantee you, of people being upset over where loot got distributed. And in general, I think the issue is that you can't ever have true hard, fast rules if you want to maximize this idea of helping the guild the best. What's going to help the guild the best is going to change on a week-by-week, day-by-day basis, depending on what your comp is, depending on what boss you're fighting, depending on a number of factors. And I think a lot of people want a clear-cut, A, B, C, D, E, this is who's going to get loot, I can follow it. That just doesn't exist. If you really are trying to maximize a guild, especially in cases like the situation I mentioned where you're not cutting edge, you're not going to be full clearing multiple times where everyone can eventually get their loot. But again, we didn't even full clear the whole instance, right? We got up to Coven and kind of just stalled there. We kind of lost interest at that point in time. And so there are a number of bosses that we've only cleared once or twice and such. And so there was no guarantee when a piece dropped that you're going to eventually get it down the line. And then we would have hoped to have full cleared multiple times, but it never happened. So again, I think in those types of guilds, the guilds that are pushing, that are needing to, in a way, still follow the mold of the high-end guilds, right? You still need to recruit, you still need to build a team, right? You want to have replacements. And so you have to function very similar, I think, to these top-end guilds, but you don't have the benefits of full clearing multiple times the top-end guilds have, where you can just say to somebody, look, you're not going to get the loot this week, but you get it next week. We couldn't always guarantee that, right? We couldn't always guarantee people getting loot the next week. We ended up extending multiple times. So I think there are a lot of guilds that are like that, where when loot drops, there's no guarantee of seeing that piece again, especially for those rare trinkets, tier pieces, things like that. So because there's not that guarantee of those pieces, who got the loot could be contentious. Now, changing the personal loot would, of course, fix that, right? If you change the personal loot, you would have the ability to everybody just gets their piece of loot. Now, we've already heard rumors that guilds will just force people to trade loot. And I think it's a very clunky system to do that. Again, we've done that in the past before, where we would just have everyone trade to the loot master, and the loot master rolls stuff out. We would do that on like heroics and things like that. In the end, it tended to only be tier pieces in other cases, but again, with personal loot and tier, that was kind of a shame, because if all your paladins have their tier already and a paladin tier piece drops, you could have gotten a token that someone else maybe could have gotten. So I understand that, and that's why a lot of guilds didn't run personal, was because of the inefficiency. And I completely agree. No one wants to DE gear, right? I'm the enchanter as well, so I would love those shards, but no one wants to DE gear. If a piece of loot drops, you want it to go to somebody. You want it to help somebody. You want to help improve your raid. That's the idea, right, with loot, is that it helps make your raid better. And so anytime that you get a piece of loot and no one could use it, that would suck. In personal loot, I think that's going to be its biggest downside, is the wastefulness of the gear that might happen. Now again, I'm going to talk about ways they might be able to fix that later, but again, I think that's the one downside currently to a 100% personal loot. So again, kind of in recap, the benefits of master loot were the ability to pick and choose where loot went. You could make sure that the people who deserved it in some cases, or simply was the best for, got the pieces of loot. There was very little waste in that situation. Now again, they could of course be abused, but I think most loot systems can be abused to some way, shape, or form. And again, it's one of those things where I think as part of a guild, you have to all kind of work together to kind of come to an agreement on your rules, right? If you join a guild and you don't agree with their sentiments, then leave, right? If you don't believe that that's fair. I think a lot of people have no problem joining guild and not getting loot, right? Understanding that, I'm going to have the opportunity to get loot in this better guild, right? I'm going to clear further. I'm going to have the opportunity to get more loot. And so I'm still better off here than in a guild where I would get more loot, but maybe not kill as many bosses, right? So again, it's a trade-off thing. You got to kind of be thinking ahead to these situations, saying, okay, what kind of situation do I want to be in? Do I want to be in a guild where I have to sit for a month and not get any loot, but then when I do have the opportunity, I can get a lot more because we're killing more bosses more frequently? Or do I want to kind of go to a lower guild where I can get loot right away, but we might only clear 5 or 6 of the 10 or 11 mythic bosses? So again, I think that's a fine choice, and giving people choice I think is a good thing in general. So the downside, as I mentioned, to Master Loot, again, is that case of the drama, the case of dealing with people who are upset over your decision making, and having to defend it. As Loot Master, multiple times I would have to defend my decisions, our choices as a council. And again, I'll admit it, council makes wrong choices. There are times when I didn't always agree with the way the council voted. Again, I'm on the council. And so they're flawed, right? We're people make mistakes, people are flawed. Loot might not always go to where it was ideally designed to go to. The complications of loot, I think, hurt that as well. So, for example, the fact that secondaries were such a big deal in Legion, and the value of certain tier sets were a big thing for some classes more than others. So, again, if you only wanted 2 pieces, you weren't probably going to get your tier pieces as quickly as someone who needed 4. So it's just one of those things where the complexity of loot, the complexity of the loot system in Legion, which I think was some of the most complex. I mean, people complained previously about things like going back to reforging, going back to having gem sockets with colors, and there was a lot of complexity there. I think Legion was just as complex when you think about the different bonuses, you think about tier gear, you think about the secondaries and how those things affected people, you think about the fact that you had to level each artifact separately, so you literally needed different gear sets and leveling sets for different classes, different specs inside of classes, it was complicated. And so I think that hurt it as well, where it was very hard for a person to know who was really going to help the most. Especially when you're comparing between things like healers and DPS. I know a lot of guilds had like a tier. DPS go first, then tanks, then healers, something along those lines. So, again, there's a lot of downside, a lot of complexity to this. Mistakes can be made. And again, there's drama that comes out of that, especially I think for those guilds that aren't top end. Top end guilds don't have to worry about it because there's an unlimited demand to be in there. Right, there's an unlimited supply of people who want to be in your top end guilds because they know they're going to get those full clears. They know they're going to get those chances at cutting edge, server first, things like that. And so everyone wants to be there. If you think you're good enough, why not try to apply? It's the guilds I think that in that 5 to 10% range, the ones that are taking a lot longer to full clear, the ones that aren't guaranteed to full clear, but yet still are trying to push and trying to be competitive. Right, you might be top 10. Or even top 20 on your server if you're on a big server, right? But again, in the world, you're 5-10% range. I think for those guilds, Master Loot has more of a drama aspect because there isn't that demand, right? You're not the best guild on server. You're probably not the place that people want to go to, and you have to kind of convince people with your personality, with your rule set, with your maybe lenience a little bit. So maybe you have to kind of give trials a bit more loot in those kind of situations. Maybe you choose not to, because again, you don't want to alienate those who have been dedicating themselves to your guild. So in that range, I do think Master Loot has some problems. It definitely wasn't perfect, but again, it was a better option I think than Personal in Legion because of the lack of waste. And no one wants to feel waste, right? No one wants to have Personal on. Somebody get a Warforged piece that has horrible stats and would have been a huge upgrade for somebody else, right? Like I mentioned before, you have a 950 helm, a 955 drops, it has worse stats, it's actually not even an upgrade for you, and yet you can't trade it because it's a higher eye level. So the fact that eye level wasn't dictating power was a big problem with Personal in Legion, because Blizzard wanted it to be eye level equals upgrade. That wasn't the case. We all know that wasn't the case, especially with things like rings and neck, because they were just secondaries. And so the scaling there was basically based upon the fact where if you had the wrong stats, you could have 10, maybe even 15 eye levels with stats. No good. Sockets also were a big deal. They were worth 10 eye level in a lot of cases. So again, sockets could add another layer of difficulty there with far as getting loot in with Personal, and the fact that the socket just counted as a modifier, right? So if you had a 955 and you got 955 with socket, that was an upgrade. You couldn't trade that anymore. So again, I think that was a bit of a problem there where it just felt bad, right? It feels bad to get a piece of loot and have to vendor it when you know someone on your raid team could have used it. That sucks. It sucks for both parties, the person who could have gotten it and the person who got the piece of loot. And who wants to feel bad about getting loot? No one. So again, I think that those were some of the big problems. Tier, as I mentioned previously, was another big one. Let's move forward to BfA and this idea of full Personal. I'm going to kind of give what I think are the pros, and I'm going to give her some of the cons. On the pro side is it does look like, and I'm going to do a separate video on this, but it does look like because of the way that secondaries are going to be scaling in a more squared function than we had an exponential function. So again, our secondaries were scaling far more exponential-like in Legion, where each time you got an eye level upgrade, you got more stats. right? The amount of increase in stats per eye level increased as time went on. So we got those huge inflations where I think I was able to get like 50% haste on my Shadow Priest, right? Just with pure stats without any extra modifiers and such. That's ridiculous, right? In BfA, however, it's going to be more of a, again, more of a square root function here, where as you increase an eye level, while your secondary stats will increase, the amount they increase is decreasing. They're going to eventually kind of plateau at some point in time, where you're going to be basically more balancing stats than really gaining that much extra. So again, you're not going to be able to push your stats as high in any one category as you were in Legion. And so because of that, and because of the scaling of the primary stats, and the fact that things like weapon damage has now been converted to attack power, all abilities are based off attack power, not off weapon damage, for the melee classes, I think that it turns out that eye level is far more the deciding factor than stats. There will still be some cases where if there's certain stats you hate, more than likely, it might be a 5 eye level thing where, yes, you could get a 5 eye level upgrade piece and it not be an upgrade, just because of the way the secondaries are working out. But, and again, rings can still fit in that mold. Now, our neck is going to always be the Heart of Azeroth, so that neck piece is kind of gone as far as worrying about getting drops for it. So again, that's one piece that we don't have to worry about as much on. But the rings, obviously, are still going to be just secondaries, and those I think are going to have some variability where eye level might not always be best. But in general, that is going to help, right? The fact that less loot will get wasted in personal because eye level is a better dictation of whether or not is an upgrade or not for you, I think it's going to be an important thing here. And again, we're going to find out more when we have Sims. We know exactly what the stat weights are. If we see that, again, your main stat is the most important stat, more than likely eye level will always be leading to an upgrade, even if it has stats that are maybe subpar, secondaries that is. Secondly is the removal of tier. So the fact that there's no more tier gear, I think is definitely going to help as well, right? That was one of the big things that tier token drop in Master opposed to the individual piece, made it more flexible. With the removal of tier, I think that's obviously going to help. So again, that gets rid of that one issue that we talked about previously, so that's another kind of plus, I think, for personal. The drama issue, again, same thing. There will still be guilds that will force people to trade loot, but again, if it's an eye level upgrade, you won't be able to. So they won't be able to force you. Now again, there might be some kind of other weird punishment. It might be that guilds just don't take any trials, right? Basically where you're invited to the guild and you have to have like a timeout period, right? Where you're not raiding at all. But again, you're in the guild to show that you care. That way people who are, trying to quote unquote ninja loot won't join your guild, because if they join and have to sit for a month, that's a whole month they couldn't be stealing other people's loot, right? So they might lead to tactics like that, which we wouldn't like, right? But again, that's a guild by guild thing. The guilds get to choose how they operate, and in my opinion, just don't pick a crappy guild, right? Don't go to a guild that does that. If you're in a friendly guild and they make that decision, hopefully if they truly are friends, they'll listen to you, you can reason with them, and again, hopefully find a compromise that works for everybody. That's what I believe guilds should do, right? Work together to find a compromise for the whole guild. So I think there are definitely a lot of pros, right? It's gonna, as me as a loot master, I'm gonna love that part, right? Not having to deal and stress with loot, the amount of time that it took to deal with loot oftentimes. Now, I never really minded that time, but I know a lot of people are like, oh my god, let's move it on, right? I can't get any loot, I don't care, let's move on, start pulling. Whereas the people who cared about loot were like, no, wait, I want to make sure I get my loot, right? So again, the fact that things should be a lot smoother is great. There's still bonus rolls, right? So again, you'll still have the opportunity to fish for pieces in a way, right? Where there's certain bosses, you say, this is the piece of loot I want, I can use my bonus rolls all there. You can, of course, go back and kill that boss again, bonus roll again. So, I mean, there's still the opportunity to kind of fish for the loot you want. And again, the fact that less loot will be wasted, and in general, the lack of tier means that when you are trading loot around, there's a better likelihood, again, that is going to be useful for somebody. It's going to really come down to really arranging your team based upon armor type than it is about, specific tier token types, right? Before you try to say, okay, I want these many people on this tier token, then people on that tier token. Now it's going to be more about, your armor type, right? Leather, mail, cloth, so on and so forth. So those are definitely, I think, some of the pros. I'm sure there are more pros. I'm sorry if this is not exhaustive, but those are some of the main ones that I can think of, is reducing the overall drama, the fact that eye level, I think, is going to be a bigger factor, making it less likely that an eye level upgrade is not an actual upgrade for you, and then as well as the removal of the tier, and again causing less loot to be wasted because of that. Now let's add in another kind of wrinkle here. So we have the Azurite gear. Now, as we know, the Azurite gear. And actually, let me maybe go ahead and pull up my Azurite gear here. Alright, so if you see the Azurite gear, this is what you basically have. So you have a helm piece that's Azurite gear, and you have these pieces. Well, what we know is that for these given pieces, we know that they are going to be specific for the name. So a specific piece of loot is going to have specific traits on it. We're going to eventually learn the traits that are best for us, right? Every class can have traits that are best for us. So here's a case where, again, eye level is not going to be the only factor in deciding whether it's an upgrade or not. What the traits are going to be more. So this is a case where, again, kind of like tier, it's going to be a case where that piece might be a better upgrade for somebody else, even at a far lower eye level, right? So again, it's a 5-level upgrade for you, but it's actually not an upgrade because the traits that are on it are not worse. Again, think kind of another like Crucible. There are many relics that, again, you could have eye level upgrades but not be better because your trait was just so strong. So because of that, I think Azurite gear is going to function in a lot of ways like other things where eye level is not going to be the main factor. Now, we know that higher eye level of the same piece is going to be better. We also know they can't Warforge and such, which again might help to some degree. So the likelihood of getting a random higher eye level piece is not going to be as high. Once a 245 or 275 piece drops or whatever, that's what's going to drop in that instance, right? You're not going to be able to get a Warforge on it. So it's one of those things where, again, hopefully eventually people get it. But again, the fact that these pieces are going to be harder, I think, to trade until you get yours that actually functions is going to make it where some pieces are going to be wasted, right? People are going to waste some loot, and that's going to suck. So again, while they got rid of tier, they added Azurite, and I think Azurite's going to have a lot of the same issues as tier, where the inability to trade because it's not a pure eye level type thing might hurt. The other thing that I want to bring up as well is my main goal when it comes to a loot system that I think would be fair is two things. One is that you should be able to make sure that every piece of loot drops goes to somebody who can use it. And only in cases where the piece is literally an upgrade for nobody, then you can destroy it. And I fear that Personal in its current iteration is not going to accomplish that. Again, the fact that the current rules state that you have to have a higher eye level or, again, a higher modified piece. So again, either has to roll like a leech or roll a socket for that to count as a better piece for you, and you can't trade it without that, I think is hurtful. I hope that, and again, I'll actually hold off on that and talk more about my hopes in the future here, but I worry that, again, there's multiple situations we've already kind of thought of where a piece of loot drops and you can't trade it, and it's A, not an upgrade for you at all, and B, would be an upgrade for somebody else. And again, that just feels bad, period. In the master looting system, the chance of that happening were a lot lower, right? Because again, you could always give the loot to who you wanted to. So again, you could find somebody to give that piece of loot for. So again, if the piece was an upgrade for you, you didn't care because it was an upgrade for you. You already had a better piece. And if it was an upgrade for you, you're like, okay, cool, I could get this. Now again, as I mentioned before, I think too many people thought they were going to, and they got upset when they didn't. But no, if a piece of loot drops in master loot, it belongs to nobody. Okay? So you don't have the loot until it's handed to you. So don't go raising your hopes when a piece of loot drops that it's going to be yours. So yeah, I think that's still going to be an issue there. Now, as far as my hopes and some suggestions, maybe some possible changes that I would like to see happen, I'm perfectly fine with them getting rid of Master Loot in general. I think that for guilds like my own, if the personal loot system was a bit more flexible, it would actually be perfect. I do think that in general, removing the need for a loot council, removing that kind of layer of separation and in some cases animosity in the guild would be very helpful. Again, I know people should get over that. I know that many top-end guilds do it, but again, I think in certain guilds, especially guilds that weren't as progressed as others, that can become a point of animosity because why are they loot council over me, right? You can't have everybody on loot council. You can try to make it more transparent, but again, it's difficult, right? There's always going to be that one person who feels left out. So having an unpersonal gets rid of that, right? There's no need for counsel anymore. If you choose loot drops, it's yours, and it's your choice to kind of choose to trade it or not, if you can trade it or not. Now, there were a number of helpful personal loot add-ons that already existed that would basically tell you if a piece of loot dropped, if it would be an upgrade for you, or also if it would be an upgrade for somebody else. So again, it was based purely on eye level, but it would be a nice thing to have people maybe make everyone have that add-on. So if a piece of loot drops and they get it, and it's a lower eye level piece or equal eye level piece to what they have, they would immediately know the people that it was available to. Now here comes my next contention, which is who then gets it. So there might still be a need for some kind of counsel to decide, okay, on the pieces that can be traded, who do they go to? So again, there might still be some management level there. It could just be a role system, which again, people I know love or hate role systems, because you can just get lucky or get unlucky. So again, we'll have to see how that all plays out. So my suggestions would be to loosen it a little bit. Again, for example, on the pieces that we know are not going to always be eye level equals better, why not loosen them up? Why not make it so that you can trade a ring that's plus 10 eye level above yours? You still don't have to, right? Like, no one can take the piece from you if it's yours, but at least give people the option to do so. And I'm well aware that people are going to say, oh, but then people are going to force you. Yeah, don't join that guild, right? If you're in a guild that's going to force you to trade a plus 10 or kick you from the guild if you don't, or bench you, or whatever the case may be, then don't join a guild like that, right? Like, take your personal agency here and say, okay, I don't want to be a part of that. And if they're your friends, talk with them, right? If they truly are your friends, negotiate. Say, I don't think this is fair, and hopefully they would listen to you. If not, maybe not the best friends. So yeah, I think that something like that could help on pieces, like the Azurite gear, same kind of thing. Allow a bit more flexibility there on when you can actually trade these pieces. Again, +5 maybe for those. Again, we'll have to kind of see what the actual tier piece drop eye levels are to kind of have an idea of what could be tradable, what could not be tradable. But I don't know why Blizzard would want to keep people from doing the good thing and giving pieces to somebody else, right? There could be a piece that's a side grade, right? It's a slight upgrade, and it's a big upgrade for somebody else, right? It's a 5 eye level. It's a 5 plus 5 eye level for you, and it's a plus 20 for someone else, right? It's a slight upgrade for you. You wouldn't be able to trade that, but again, you might want to, right? You might say, hey, it's a slight upgrade. It's plus 5 eye levels. It's worse stats though, and so it's technically an upgrade, but I don't really want it. Here, you have it. Why does Blizzard have to keep that from happening? Right, I'm okay with them making things personal loot in some ways, but why not make it flexible, right? Why not allow people to trade the loot if they want to trade the loot? Locking that down, I just don't quite understand. And again, I understand it not being huge, because again, if someone gets a plus 30 eye level, I'm sorry, it's an upgrade. Even if it has the worst stats on the planet, plus 30 eye levels is an upgrade, period. Especially going to happen in BfA. So yeah, they don't need to be able to trade that, because they're never going to want to trade that. Because it's probably going to be a huge upgrade for them anyway. And even if it would be a bigger for somebody else, it's still a big upgrade for them. But for those cases, those side grade cases where it's for you and great for somebody else, I want to be able to trade that piece, right? I want to be able to say, hey, you know what, you have this, right? It's going to help the raid out. That's the whole benefit of Master Loot, is every loot decision was meant to help the raid. Personal loot, you can get loot that's not going to help the raid. It might actually, again, I've heard people talking about how it might cause people to progress slower, because if they don't get the loot to the people they need to, if their tanks just get unlucky and don't get a lot of loot, they might get behind because their tanks don't have enough effective health, their tanks are dying too much, or their DPS isn't as high as it needs to be because it went to different people, right? All their healers got gear, which I'm a healer, so I'll be fine with that, but all their healers got gear, so no one's dying, but they're not killing anything either. So again, I don't want a situation like that to happen. Make it flexible, allow people to trade loot around. Now again, if they backtrack this entirely and allow master loot, cool, fine. Our guild would probably actually decide to not run master in more situations than not. It's something we would obviously talk about, but again, I think choice is fine. I understand the Blizzard's idea of moving to personal. I think that they kind of over-exaggerated some of the claims about the abuses, because for every one claim of abuse, there's probably multiple claims of it working great. And again, I think that the claims of abuse were ones where that's also kind of like leaving out the human agency of being able to kind of like rectify that choice or that situation on their own. It sucks, obviously, to be screwed over like that, but then you can just leave, right? And again, it still sucks, and it would be nice to be able to prevent that. But again, that's the way life works, right? Bad things are going to happen. It's more about allowing people the tools to fix the problem than it is forcing them to always do the right thing. So again, I think that the change to the personal loot system can work, can be functional. I don't think the way that it's currently implemented right now is going to fix all the problems. I think that there's going to be more problems in some ways than there are currently. I think other problems will be resolved. But again, I think that if they re-examine their personal and they simply do something as simple as making it a bit more flexible as far as when you can trade pieces, it would allow the top end guilds again to kind of still shuffle loot in directions. And again, if those people in those guilds are cool with it, great. Again, people always talk about how the change was meant to kind of reduce, basically multiple runs. It was meant to reduce the idea of split runs. We know it's not going to happen. You know the top end guilds are going to find a way to maximize their loot haul, right? To get as high a level gear in their raid as possible when that mythic week opens up. So I don't really think that there's really a direct way of doing so. It might hamper it a little bit, but again, we've already heard rumors of how the top end guilds are going to get around this system. So I don't think Blizzard should be aiming it in that direction. I think instead it should be aiming it in, let's make the loot system fairer and again simpler. And I do think that personal loot can be simpler and possibly fairer if they were to modify it to allow for the higher degree of flexibility. Alright, well those are my thoughts. Again, let me know what you think. I can be entirely wrong. Again, we're not even sure if this is going to go completely live in the way that it is currently. I just want to give you my thoughts currently on both the system we had in Legion, how that functioned, again, from my perspective, as well as what I think about how a all personal loot rating tier might go, the pros, the cons. But yeah, so hopefully you enjoyed this. Please, again, leave your comments down in the comment section. Leave me a like if you liked the video. Leave me a dislike if you think I'm entirely wrong. I'm okay with that. Just my opinion. And again, I will see you in the next one.